Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's Monday. That means it's time for the red set review. We are past the halfway point in the Oath of the Gatewatch set review. As always, there are 3 disclaimers right off the top, the most important being that this is a limited set review. This is not for constructed. I might make references here and there, but my ratings, my comments, the whole point of this video is not for constructed. But as always, you should have watched the white set review, the blue set review. Go back and check them out if you haven't. The full disclaimers are there. But we're going to jump right on into the first red card. Up first, we have Consuming Sinkhole, which sounds offensive or like an insult. Consuming Sinkhole is 3 and a red for an instant at common. It has Devoid, and it says choose one. Exile target land creature, or Consuming Sinkhole deals 4 damage to target player. Consuming Sinkhole. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm pretty sure it's just a total sideboard card. Land creatures are not going to be running around just as commonly as they were in Battle for Zendikar. We're losing 2 full packs of Awaken cards. Yeah, there's those few creatures here that, you know, when they enter the battlefield, they awaken a land, or when they die, they awaken a land. But land creatures, I just don't think are going to be a super common thing. So I don't think it's correct to main deck this card for that ability. And I don't think it's correct to ever main deck a spell that says deal 4 damage to a player for 4 mana. It's expensive. That 4 damage doesn't do anything unless it's killing them. I don't play Lava Axe. I wouldn't play Consuming Sinkhole for that. It's probably a little bit more playable in Sealed, where you're going to have lower quality spells anyways, but in Draft, I just don't ever want to main deck this card. I'll take it, kind of late in the pack if it's the only red card, and I'm definitely in red, and I'll put it in the sideboard just in case I see an awakened creature or shambling vents or any sort of the man lands that might be a little bit of a pain to deal with, because this is instant speed, so you can kill them on your opponent's turn. But total sideboard card, so we're going to go with a solid D. Next up, we have Eldrazi Aggressor. This is a 2 and a red creature Eldrazi drone at common. It's a 2/3, it has Devoid, and Eldrazi Aggressor has haste as long as you control another colorless creature. 2/3s for 3 are totally fine. They're not quite red's bread and butter. 3/2s for 3 are kind of what red usually wants, so this already doesn't feel terribly great because of the 2/3 kind of reverse of the stats. Maybe getting haste doesn't make it all that much better to me. This needs to have haste on turn 3, which means you need to have had a 2-drop colorless creature or a 1-drop colorless creature. Getting a 2/3 hasty guy on turn 5, that's not going to do anything for you. If this was a 3/2 that maybe got haste on turn 3, then I'd be a little bit more excited. But as it is, I think it's just totally filler. I think you can play this if you have to, but I don't think you really, really want to. So I think I'm going to go all the way down to a C-. I was almost at a C there, but no, I'm going to go with a C-. I think it's a little tiny bit below filler. I don't really want an Eldrazi Aggressor. If it was a 3/2, sure. 2/3, no thanks. So C-. Next up, we have Eldrazi Obligator. This is a 2 and a red creature Eldrazi at rare. It's a 3/1, it has Devoid, and it says, when you cast Eldrazi Obligator, you may pay 1 generic, 1 colorless. If you do, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap that creature, and it gains haste until end of turn, the usual threaten ability. And it also has haste. Don't miss that. There are some cards that are templated a little bit strangely with important words down at the bottom where you'll usually think that it's just going to be flavor text. So it does have haste. Don't forget that. Hasty 3/1 for 3 is totally fine. I would play this without paying the extra ability cost, just as a filler, boring little creature that, will get in for some damage on turn 3, hopefully. If you play it a little bit later in the game, you can tack on a couple of extra mana, and you get to steal one of your opponent's creatures, and still, get in with this 3/1 hasty guy, and potentially their creature as well. Hopefully their creature. Hopefully you're casting that in a decent enough board state that you can do that. I don't think it's quite first pickable. I think it's one of those rares, kind of like the blue ones that we specifically talked about. There was a black one as well, a 2/1 flyer, Bearer of Silence maybe, where I'm going to feel a little bit bad opening it as my rare because it's not going to be a first pick. Maybe in pack 2, maybe in pack 3. But pack 1, pick 1, it's going to hurt a little bit. But I think it is still a decently high pick. I think you're going to take this relatively highly in the packs when you're kind of searching for the color that you want to be. So I could see this as pick 3, pick 4, pick 5, once the removal has kind of been picked out after the bombs. So I'm pretty happy to give this a solid B. I'm not usually a big fan of threaten effects, but when it's on a 3-1 hasty creature, and I have the option of just, casting the 3-1 hasty creature as a 3-drop, I'm a little bit higher on it, so I'll go with a solid B. Next up, we have Immobilizer Eldrazi, which I feel is totally misnamed. This should be Immobilizing Eldrazi, or it should be Eldrazi Immobilizer. Immobilizer Eldrazi just sounds dumb. It sounds like it was mistranslated or something. Anyways, it's 1 and a red for a creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon. It's a 2-1. It has Devoid. And for 2 and a colorless, you can give each creature with toughness greater than its power can't block this turn. So each creature with toughness greater than its power can't block this turn. So those 2/3s, they can't block. Those 3/5s, they can't block. Everything else that's symmetrical or that has greater power than toughness can still block. That's really, really, really corner case. It can hit a decent enough number of creatures. We've seen a number of 2/3s and we've seen a number of 3/5s. I've even talked about how I like to have 3/5s for 5 as blockers. We know that there are a bunch of 1/4s running around and 2/4s, but I still think this is just such a total crapshoot if your opponent's going to have any or not. And that's the hallmark of a sideboard card to me. A card that may or may not hit anything in my opponent's deck or just a small subset. I don't think I want to main deck it. It's a 2-1 for 2, which is okay. I would far prefer a 2-2 for 2, or for that 2-2 or for that 2-1 to have first strike or something cool. So I just don't think I'm going to ever run this main deck. And even sideboarding, I still think it's fairly bad because you still have to pay for the effect to make the things not be able to block. So I'm kind of out on this. I'm going to go with a D- on it, but I'll keep an eye on it. But I just don't think it's that good. D-. Next up, we have Kozlak's Return. Kozlak's Return is 2 and a red for an instant at Mythic. It has Devoid, and it says Kozlak's Return deals 2 damage to each creature. This was a common called Pyroclasm back in the day. Now it's a Mythic, partly because it is a storyline point, and storyline points are often Mythic. But there's also a giant paragraph that, additionally makes this a bit more Mythic. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you may exile Kozlak's Return from your graveyard. If you do, Kozlak's Return deals 5 damage to each creature. So we get kind of like 2.5 Pyroclasms there. So this is probably pretty decent, I'm going to say. You want to make sure that you play this properly. Pyroclasm is fine enough, but you want to make sure that you are not, hurting yourself just as much as you're hurting opponent. You want to come out ahead. Now, of course, you're going to have Kozlak's Return in your hand, so you're going to know that. You're going to be able to sandbag some creatures, keep them back, make your opponent overextend, and then wipe out all of their X2s. And then, if you have a big Eldrazi, you can later in the game do this for 5, which probably will wipe out your board as well. So ultimately, I think this is way, 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 way more constructed than it is limited, but I think it is still playable enough in limited. Radiant Flames was okay enough, and it was basically Pyroclasm most of the time. And I think this will be Pyroclasm most of the time as well. You're not always going to have a 7-drop Eldrazi in the deck. So I think you can be fairly happy taking this and playing it. Just make sure that you are playing around it carefully. Kind of like the Drown in Sorrow that was in black. Flaying Tendrils, I think it was. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to give it a solid B. Of course, you're never going to pass this because it is pre-ordering at like $20 because it's going to be big and constructed most likely. But competitively limited, I think B is where I'm going to end up on it. Next up, we have Maw of Kozlak. Maw of Kozlak is 3 and a red for a creature Eldrazi drone at common. It's a 2/5. It has Devoid, and for a single colorless, Maw of Kozlak gets +2/-2 until end of turn. So you can make this into a 4/3. You can make this into a 6/1. You could kill it if you wanted to, but I wouldn't advise that. Pre-pump, it's a little bit more defensive than red usually wants to be. But Kozlak Sentinel was decent enough, though it was also much cheaper than 4 mana. It was 2 mana. So potentially being a 4/3 or a 6/1, if you think you can get through with it without a problem, is decent enough, especially for just a single colorless mana. Unfortunately, neither of those stats are great because of the increasing vulnerability of the creature to cheaper and cheaper removal and blocks and things like that. Ultimately, I think this just kind of ends up falling to filler level. I don't think you should feel too bad playing it, but I think you generally want to look for something better than this. Take this very late and, preferably find yourself some better creatures. So, middle of the road C from me. Next up, we have Reality Hemorrhage. Reality Hemorrhage is 1 and a red for an instant at common. It has Devoid, and it says Reality Hemorrhage deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So Shock is maybe dead? This, of course, is Shock, except it costs 1 more. Is being Devoid worth a full extra mana? I'm not sure. I hope that they've just decided that this is where this ability should be in this set, and that we do still see Shocks from now and again. But either way, it's still fine enough. We'll begrudgingly pay that extra mana for our 2 damage instant, just like we'll begrudgingly pay that extra mana for our Oblivion Ring, and the cards will still be pretty darn good. 2 damage instant speed with the option of hitting an opponent is just fantastic. It's not late game removal, obviously. You're not going to be killing the things that are being played on turn 6, turn 7, turn 8. But of course, by that time, you can use it just to do that 2 extra damage to finish off your opponent. Early game, it can also be a huge tempo hit to kill off an X2 that might have gotten in for 2, 4, 6, 8 damage. There's better removal, but Shock, even an expensive one, is still totally a fine pick. I'll go with a B- on it. I won't pass this card too often after the first few picks in a pack. Next up, we have Akum Flameseeker. Akum Flameseeker is a 2 and a red creature human shaman ally at common. It's a 3/2, and it has Cohort. Tap an untapped ally you control. Discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So it's Rummage. Good old Goblin Rummager. I'm just... I want Cohort to be good, and there are certainly a number of great Cohort abilities. We've already seen them, putting counters on all of your team, making zombies, draining life. But Rummaging, I just don't feel is all that good. Now, this is a 3/2 for 3, and that is Red's bread and butter. That is Red's totally fine, normal filler creature. The Cohort ability... I'm repeating myself, and I'll continue to repeat myself. I'm worried that tapping 2 entire creatures is just a little bit expensive for some effects. And tapping 2 entire creatures just to rummage does feel pretty damn expensive to me. So I don't know how often I'm going to be taking this and excitedly waiting to cohort it. But I'll be taking it and playing it if I need a 3/2 for 3, I think. And the upside is there if your game goes light enough and you have a land in hand and you want to get rid of it and you happen to have not attacked. But generally in red, you want to be attacking. Your creatures are going to be tapped anyways. So I'm not a big fan of this, but it is just totally fine kind of filler. Replace it if you can, play it if you can't. Middle of the road, C. Next up, we have Boulder Salvo. Boulder Salvo is a 4 and a red sorcery at common. It has Surge for 1 and a red, way cheaper. Boulder Salvo deals 4 damage to target creature. This is massively overcosted without Surge. 5 mana to deal 4 damage at sorcery speed, when we just had Stone Fury at 5 that dealt at least 5 damage, and sometimes more at instant speed. Massively overcosted. At the Surge cost, it's actually pretty decent. 2 mana to deal 4 damage, even at sorcery speed, is still fairly okay. Just like Cohort, I'm curious about Surge. Surge definitely works way better in Two-Headed Giant. Surge, I think, is fantastic in Two-Headed Giant. You're going to be casting this for 2 mana all the time in Two-Headed Giant. In one-on-one draft... I mentioned this in the comments for the blue set review just recently. You don't very often play 2 spells in a turn in limited. And I don't want to play bad, cheap cards just to enable Surge. I'd rather play average cards across my deck rather than play some bad ones that only combo with some better ones. Because, of course, if I play one of those 1 mana give a creature haste cards, which we'll see in just a few, that's meant to be played with Surge, and that card's going to be virtually dead in my hand if I don't have my Surge card as well. And I don't want to play cards that are going to be dead or are going to be very mediocre unless I have another card to build into it. So I'm hesitant about Surge, which means I'm hesitant about this card. I love the Surge cost. I hate the non-Surge cost. And that's going to be kind of my real barometer for whether or not I like a surge card, at least in the set review, is would I cast it for the non-surge cost. This one I wouldn't, but the surge cost is so cheap that I am willing to be a little bit higher on this than I would have been. I probably would have gone for a C-, but because that surge cost is so cheap, I will go for a C+ on it. But I'm curious to see how this plays out. I definitely want to see if this ends up being a high pick common or a common that just nobody ever wants. So let's go for a C+ for now, but I'm hesitant. Next up, we have Brute Strength. Brute Strength is 1 and a red for an instant at common. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. It's no Titan Strength. It's more expensive, and we don't get to scry, but we get trample. I guess that's a thing. Ultimately, it's a pretty weak combat trick that you probably only want to play if you're stretching for playables. Combat tricks like this, newer players love them because they say, wow, I can get in for an extra 3 damage, and that's fantastic if you're winning the game that turn. But if you're not, it just doesn't do that much. Like if you're on an empty board and you're getting in with your 2/2, yeah, getting in an extra 3 is awesome. But you could also just play another creature and next turn get in for 4 and continue getting in for 4, for the rest of the game that your opponent doesn't have or your opponent has an empty board. Combat tricks like this are just generally a little bit weak. They're totally fine if you're stretching for playables, if you just don't have anything else. But most of the time you do want to replace these with a creature or a removal spell or any sort of higher quality card. So C- for me, totally replaceable in my mind. Next up, it's time for a Planeswalker. We have Chandra, Flamecaller. Chandra is 4 red for a Planeswalker. Chandra at Mythic. She starts with 4 loyalty counters. Her +1 says put 2 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. 0. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards, +1. -X is her ultimate. Chandra Flamecaller deals X damage to each creature. Each creature, all of them, not just your opponents. The +1's really nice. Getting 2 3/1s that you can throw at your opponent is pretty handy. My concern here is how quickly they're going to get outclassed, how quickly your opponent's just going to have ways of, blocking them each turn, especially given that Chandra is a 6-drop Planeswalker. 6-drop Planeswalkers do give me pause. If you keep in mind Akum Stonewaker or Satyr Nick Smith, they really went down in quality as the game went on to make those 3/1 elementals. Now this is making 2, and it is making them quote unquote for free every turn, whereas those 2 you had to pay the mana for them. But the second your opponent gets an X4 or a pair of X4s, they just get blanked. But yeah, at least with Chandra, you don't have to pay for them, and she is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So there is that. So the +1 I think is fine. The 0 is super nice. You have a couple lands in hand later in the game, throw them away, get 3 more cards. Empty hand is just draw a card for 0. Card draw is awesome. Red always wants that. So I'm pretty happy with the 0. The -X is, I don't know. In Constructed, where you can totally build your deck around, using her ultimate and wiping your opponent's board and doing things like that, I think it's pretty okay. But in Limited, it's a creature format. You're going to have creatures on your own board. And if you don't, that means A, you're just getting pounded in the face, and B, Chandra's getting killed pretty damn fast because she can't protect herself. So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. You could play Chandra as a 4 damage board wipe. Play her for 6 and immediately -4 her. Now, if you get lucky and you can play her and there are only X3s on the board, you could -3 her right away, wipe the board. So I do see some potential good situations for Chandra to really shine. But I'm not totally sold on her, especially being a 6-drop Planeswalker. I like my Planeswalkers to be a lot slower. Now, caveat, as always, Planeswalkers are damage sponges. They will freak your opponent out. Your opponent will start sending all of their damage towards the Planeswalker, even, trading with creatures to try to get through to that Planeswalker, and that is worth a ton, even at 6 mana. Being a damage sponge in Limited is a big thing. Good players will know to just ignore your Planeswalker if it's not a super effective one. And I think it might be correct-ish to ignore Chandra, depending on what state the game is in when she does finally come down. But, I mean, she is a Planeswalker, she is a Mythic, you're going to first pick her, you're never not going to first pick a Planeswalker. So I'm pretty happy to give her a B+. I do like her abilities, I do think they're fine. It's just the 6 mana that gives me a little bit of pause, especially in red. But if you can get there and you can put her down, I think you can do some pretty fun things with her. So I'm going to go with a B+ on Chandra. I'm interested to see how she shapes up. I think she's ultimately going to be on the lower end of Planeswalkers that we've seen lately, but B+. Next up, we have Cinder Hellion. Cinder Hellion is a 4 and a red creature Hellion at common. It's a 4/4. It has trample, and when Cinder Hellion enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to target opponent. So a 5 mana 4/4 is okay. That's not quite passing the vanilla test, but as we know, the vanilla test does start to fall off around this stage. Dealing 2 damage to your opponent is fine enough. I guess that's worth an extra mana. This isn't terribly exciting, though, and I do feel like it is just totally filler level yet again, and this is going to be repeated again and again and again in my red set review. The red common and uncommon creatures are very filler feeling. If you can replace this, do it. If you can't, play it. Don't feel too bad about it. There's a lot of filler creatures, and I think this is just yet another one of those filler creatures, so middle of the road C. Next up, we have Devour in Flames. Devour in Flames is a 2 and a red sorcery at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast Devour in Flames, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Devour in Flames deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Not to player, keep that in mind. If this could damage players, I think it would cost more than 3 mana. Bouncing a land back is a downside, except maybe in the most dedicated of landfall decks. Now, there will be enough time still where it's not a downside because you were going to miss a land drop anyway, so you can just replay the land that you bounced. 5 damage to creature or planeswalker is very nice, especially for 3 mana. It's less than creature or player, as I said, but it would have costed more than 3 mana if you could have hit players as well. Solid enough removal. It kills most things until we're into the extreme bomb territory and very late game. So I'm pretty happy to take these relatively highly, and I'd probably even play a second copy. The bouncing a land is a downside, but I feel like there are just enough times where I would miss a land drop, especially if I'm playing Spiky Saturday. That I would be fine playing these, and I'd be fine bouncing that land. So B- for me. 5 damage to a creature should be a pretty solid removal in this set. Next up, we have Embodiment of Fury. This is a 3 and a red creature elemental at uncommon. It's a 4/3. It has trample. Land creatures you control have trample, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target land you control become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste until end of turn. It's still a land. So we've got a 4/3 for 4 with trample. That's totally fine. That is totally fine. The 3 toughness is ever so slightly small, but hey, totally fine. Giving your lands trample is nice, but there is going to be significantly less Awaken in the format now. There's no Awaken in Oath of the Gatewatch outside of these landfall triggers and those Awaken when they come in or leave the battlefield creatures. And there's, going to be still some Awaken kicking around from that 1 pack of Battle for Zendikar, but not too much. So the lands trample thing, whatever, take it or leave it. Giving a land, making a land a 3/3 whenever a land comes in is pretty cool, and that land will have trample. The threat of a surprise 3/3 when you landfall can be a problem for your opponent. I don't think this is first pickable, but I think it's a pretty includable card in basically every red deck. Just kind of a solid all-around okay card. I don't think you'll cut this very much at all, and I think you'll actually be happy playing this most of the time, so I'm going to go with a B- on it. Next up, we have Expedite. Expedite is a single red mana. It's an instant, it's a common, and it says target creature gains haste until end of turn. Draw a card. Well, this is another Surge enabler. It's one of those super cheap cards that is going to make your Boulder Salvo cost only 2 mana. But I can't stand this card. I do not want to play a card that just gives a creature haste, and it replaces itself, but I want this to be anything else. I want this to be a threat. I want this to be a removal spell. I want this to be... I would take a pump spell over this. I don't want to play a spell that gives a creature haste, because that means that this spell is basically worthless outside of cycling and activating Surge. As I said, I don't want to play mediocre cards just to turn on a mechanic, because you may not draw the cards that you need to turn on that mechanic, to actually use that mechanic, to use this. So I'm totally out on Expedite. I will pass this so hard. I will let other people play these. I will let other people jump onto the playing bad cards to activate Surge train, and I'll see how it goes from the sidelines. I'm out on this card. I hate it. I've got to go with an F on it. I'm sure some people are going to give it a higher grade, and yeah, maybe it's more realistically like a D plus or something, but no. I am so totally out on these super cheap, mediocre, cycling, hopefully activating Surge cards. F. Sorry, guys. F. Next up, we have Fall of the Titans. Fall of the Titans is an XX red instant rare. It has Surge for X and a red, so it cuts the cost in half. Fall of the Titans deals X damage to each of up to 2 target creatures and or players. Fall of the Titans. This is 7 mana for 2 lightning bolts. No, thank you. 4 mana for 2 lightning bolts. That's a fair bit better. I'd rather just have 2 lightning bolts, but we all know that that's never going to really happen again. This one, I think, is one of the ones that suffers from Surge being fantastic and the non-Surge cost being pretty mediocre. And another one of the cards that I think, it's an absolute bomb and total include, and boy, this is going to be one of the best cards in your deck in Two-Headed Giant. And I think it's one of the cards that is going to just drop miserably in one-on-one draft. And that's going to be a rant that I'll save and for another day. I'll briefly give you a glimpse of it. I think Surge was a stupid idea to put in a real set. If it was in an Arc Enemy set or a Plane Chase set or a Commander set or some sort of supplemental multiplayer product, yeah, sure, totally. Put this in Conspiracy. In a real set, I'm not terribly happy with Surge. So anyways, what happens with this card? I don't know. I think it depends entirely on how often you will have Surge and still have mana left over in order to cast this spell to a sufficient level that you're happy with it. If I play an Expedite, then I'm still going to have all of my mana -1 to pump into this spell. But if I play like a 4-drop creature, I'm probably not going to have much mana left to pump into this spell. It is still a solid removal spell. It's still going to, hopefully kill, I don't know, maybe a couple of 3/3s or something. So I'm fairly happy with it. I don't want to first pick it, though. So I think I'm going to go with a B- on it. Again, it's one of these cards that I think is going to be amazing in Two-Headed Giant. If this is in your Two-Headed Giant pool, see you in the finals, basically. But one-on-one draft, I think it drops a lot lower. But it is just, X removal, so I've got to go with a B- on it. But we'll see. We'll see if I'm wrong about Surge. I want to be, but I don't know. Next up, we have Goblin Dark Dwellers. This is a 3 red creature goblin at rare. It's a 4/4. It has menace, and when Goblin Dark Dwellers enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So you basically give an instant or sorcery with 3 or less flashback for free. Yeah, this is, a 4/4 menace for 5, which is totally fine. We just had Shatterskull Recruit, and it was playable enough. You would generally play that more often than you wouldn't in a heavy red deck, because it was red, just like this one is. Sometimes you'll get the awesome value of pulling back a small removal spell. You'll pull back Devour in Flames, you'll pull back Touch of the Void, or Complete Disregard, or something awesome that's going to get you some really nice value. But I think a lot of the time, this is just going to be a Shatterskull Recruit. Just like Prowess, the average deck has 6-ish instant and sorcery spells. And a lot of them are not going to be 3 or less. So I think a lot of the time you're going to hit nothing off of this. In Constructed, yeah, this thing's going to be big. I see burn decks just going crazy with this, getting, basically 4 more copies of their best 3 or lower burn spells. Yeah, it's going to be fantastic once they get to the 5 mana level. But in Limited, this value falls off a fair bit. It's definitely not first pickable, but I think it's fine enough once you're headed towards red. The upside is great, and the base creature is totally fine. It's just you're not going to activate that upside too much. So I'm going to go with a B- on it. I think you'll play it all the time, and I think you'll be fairly happy playing it. And when you do get to go off with it, you'll be super ecstatic. But B-, no higher because of the usual limited is a creature format spiel. Next up, we have Goblin Freerunner. Goblin Freerunner is a 3 and a red creature goblin warrior ally at common. It's a 3/2 surge for 1 and a red, and it has menace. So it's a 3-2 Menace for 4, which is overcosted. We had Boggart Brutes, which were a 3-mana 3-2 with Menace. So overcosted by 1 if we don't surge it, undercosted by 1 if we do surge it. Ultimately, I think I'd be okay paying 4 mana for a Boggart Brute, but less happy, obviously. If I get it for 2, that's a nice bonus, and a 3-2 with Menace is still going to get through even if I do play this on turn 4 or turn 5. There's the potential, of course, of playing this on turn 3, but you need a 1-drop. Yeah, it seems like a fine card. I don't feel like it's a must-have or a first pick or even a relatively high pick for red. I think you'll just kind of get this when it comes to you, and you'll play it more often than you won't, and you'll just kind of be fine enough with it. So, C+ from me. Next up, we have Kazool's Tool Collector. I have no idea who or what Kazool is. 2 and a red for a creature Ogre Warrior at uncommon. It's a 3-2, and it has pay 0, attach target equipment you control to Kazool's Tool Collector. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So again, we've got a 3-2 for 3, which is totally okay and is red's bread and butter. These are the stats and the cost that we expect to see. The ability, of course, is meaningless. There is so few equipment that I would be willing to play, and the ones that I would are at rare. Don't play bad equipment just to support this ability. Just treat it as a 3-2 for 3, which is fine and totally fine filler material, which seems to be red's creatures' motto this set. So many of red's creatures are just, at least common uncommon, filler level. They're just totally filler level, which makes me slightly worried about red's ability to be kind of a main color. I've got to go with a C. It's total filler material. If you need a 3-2 for 3, here you go. If you don't, get rid of it. Kind of sucks that it's an uncommon too. But I mean, that ability is an uncommon ability, so be it. We'll see if... I don't know, maybe an equipment deck pops up in Standard or something, but I strongly doubt it. So C for Kazool's Toll Collector. Next up, we have Oath of Chandra. This is the red Oath. It's 1 and a red for a legendary enchantment at rare. When Oath of Chandra enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target creature an opponent controls. At the beginning of each end step, if a planeswalker enters the battlefield under your control this turn, Oath of Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. We ignore that. It does not happen in Limited. It will happen maybe once the entire time that you play Oath of the Gatewatch Limited. We're looking at this as a sorcery speed, 3 damage to target creature. And not even to player. So it's not even, a Searing Spear or expensive Lightning Bolt. It is 3 damage to creature only, which is still fine. We've got to take the removal and the burn that we can get. Sorcery speed, Lightning Bolt for creatures for 2 is still fine. Yeah, like all the Oaths, the second ability is meaningless, but this one, similar to Jace's, is just a totally fine card on its own. Take it, maybe even first pick it in a weak pack, but there's enough good common and uncommon removal, and even some awesome creatures at common and uncommon that I think you'll probably take those over this, but in a weak pack, I could see it being first pickable. I'll go with a B- on it. One of the better Oaths. Next up, we have Press into Service with one hell of an evil-looking goblin. 4 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. Support 2. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. On-tap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. I am not a fan of threaten effects. I'm just not. I know the power, and I get killed by them here and there, but I'm just not a big fan of them, especially as they start to get more and more expensive. Even Turn Against, which everybody thought was going to be incredible for being instant speed, and was for a few weeks, just ended up being kind of mediocre. Getting support 2 and going back to sorcery speed for 5 mana, I just don't see it. I just don't super care. Play this if you like these effects, but I hate them. My personal rating would be lower than a C. But I think objectively it is kind of the C level, meaning that it's totally replaceable if you can and playable if you can't, or playable if you want it. But I'm just not a fan of threaten effects. They need to be really good. They need to be tacked onto a creature. They need to have something else going on more than support 2 for me to really be excited. 5 mana, support 2, threaten. Not a huge fan, but C, middle of the road. Next up, we have Pyromancer's Assault. Pyromancer's Assault is 3 and a red for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, Pyromancer's Assault deals 2 damage to target creature or player. F. I'm iffy about the Surge mechanic because of how uncommonly you play 2 spells a turn in Limited. And if you're commonly playing 2 spells a turn in Limited, you're going to be out of cards in like 2 turns. at which point you are no longer going to be ever playing two spells a turn unless you are not playing any spells every other turn. Wasting a turn and a card slot on this enchantment just does not seem like something you should ever do. It's not even a build around me card in Limited because you can't possibly refill your hand fast enough to continue casting 2 spells a turn. It's just not going to happen. I'm so out on this card. I've seen people say, oh, this is a great build around me. I can take all the cheap cantrips. No, just no. F. Straight up F. I don't like it. Do not like it. F. Next up, we have Reckless Bushwacker. Reckless Bushwacker is 2 and a red for a creature goblin warrior ally at uncommon. It's a 2/1. It has a giant chin, I think. You can surge it for 1 and a red. It has haste, and when Restless Bushwacker enters the battlefield, if its surge cost was paid, other creatures you control get +1/+0 and gained haste until end of turn. 2/1 for haste for 3. I'm not super excited about it, but it's fine enough. Later in the game, getting a 2/1 haste for 2, I'm even less excited about. But I do then get to give my entire team +1/+0, which, hopefully would do a little bit for me. It's a fine enough creature, and if you can go wide and drop this, it can be okay. Going wide, however, is something that I'm not sure if it's going to happen too much in this set. The Scion producers are few and far between. I think there's a number that you can count on one hand, really, at least at common and uncommon levels. And one pack of Rise of the Eldrazi, I'm just not sure how wide you can go in this format. It'll remain to be seen, of course, but I'm not sure. So Reckless Bushwacker is fine. I think you're going to include it more often than you wouldn't. But I think it's really going to depend on how wide this format can be. I'm going to start off with a C+ on it. It could potentially go ever so slightly higher, and it could also potentially drop, but let's go with a C+ on it to start. Next up, we have Spark Mage's Gambit. Spark Mage's Gambit is 1 and a red for a sorcery at common. Spark Mage's Gambit deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures. Those creatures can't block this turn. I've never been impressed by similar cards to this. I cannot think of their names offhand, but we always get an effect like this every few sets or so. It fits the best in a wide, hyper-aggressive deck as a way of finishing off the game. You have, say, 4 creatures, your opponent has 2. You get to ping them, maybe kill them if they're X1s, and then you get to get in with your entire team and hopefully finish the game. I don't like these cards because they tend to be a dead card unless you're going to get through for the win. If you're just getting through for a couple of extra damage for one single turn, it's not going to do enough. It has to be, the card that wins you the game. And I just ultimately think this ends up being a little bit more sideboardy. If you see some valuable X1s that you want another way of killing, maybe 2-for-1ing, things like that. If you are a hyper-aggressive kind of wide deck, then this definitely goes up in value. But I think for most decks, you just want to keep this in the sideboard and not really look to take it. So I'll go with a D+ on it. It's definitely decent in the aggressive wide decks, but most other decks don't really want it. Next up, we have Tears of Ellicott. Tears of Ellicott is a 1 and a red instant at uncommon. Tears of Ellicott can't be countered by spells or abilities. We don't care about that. Tears of Ellicott deals 5 damage to target creature with flying. Sideboard only. Sideboard only. There's no way that you want a main deck flying removal in this set. There's just not enough flyers flying around that you won't be able to deal with, or that you won't have your own piddly little flyer that can probably just trade with it, or maybe blanket. Don't main deck this. There's just no point. Take this late in the pack and only sideboard it in when you see a viable flying threat that you have no way of dealing with. This is very clearly a constructed card built to kind of help with any dragons that might have been overpowered from Dragons of Terrakir. Tears of Ellicott, take it really late. Don't main deck it. Sideboard it if you see a really good reason. So straight up D. Next up, we have Tyrant of Ellicott. Tyrant of Ellicott is a 5 red creature dragon at rare. It's a 5/4. You can surge it for 3 red. It has flying, and when Tyrant of Ellicott enters the battlefield, if its surge cost was paid, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. I do not want to play a 5/4 flyer for 7 with no enter the battlefield effects in a red deck. Just no. That's a bad creature. If you get to 7 and you need a way of finishing the game, this will finish the game. But that's just not something that I just don't think you want to build towards that. Bleh. For 5, and getting a free lightning bolt, that's way better. A 5-mana 5/4 flyer that lightning bolts whatever you want, creature or player, is just solid. Like that is amazing. And so again, like Fall of the Titans, I think in a two-headed giant, this card is just insane. This card is just amazing. You're going to play this card every single time. You're going to be so happy when you open this. You're just going to be super happy. In 1v1 limited, what happens? I don't know. It's going to require that you still get to the late game because this is going to cost at least 6 mana because you're at least going to be playing a 1-mana spell unless you're playing Bonesaw, and we'll talk about that in a couple of days, and you should not be. This is going to be still a 6-drop. Or a 7-drop. But of course, you're going to get a spell's worth of value off of that extra mana you're paying, which should be pretty decent. But yeah, I'm not sold on it. It's definitely a good card. It's definitely going to do some work, and it's definitely going to end the game if it comes down. But the question is going to be, does it come down? This, unfortunately, is one of those cards where I think you do not ever want to play this for the non-surge cost. And you always want to play it for the surge cost. So it's really going to depend on how the format shapes up. It's going to really depend on how the mechanic shapes up. I'm going to start with a B- on it. It definitely ends the game, but I'm going to be slightly hesitant on it. I don't really want to take this first pick, at least as the format starts. So I'm going to be a little bit out-ish on it with a B-, but we'll see how it goes. Next up, we have Ottos Commando. Ottos Commando is a 1 and a red creature, goblin, archer, ally at common. It's a 2/1. It has first strike, and it has cohort, tap an untapped ally you control. Ottos Commando deals 1 damage to target opponent. So not to creature. You don't get to kill off creatures. You just get to ping your opponent. A lot of the common cohort effects, I just feel miserable about them. Spending 2 full creatures to ping an opponent is one of those effects where I'm just like, I don't really want to do that, especially in red where you so rarely want to just keep your creatures back. You want to be attacking in red. You want to be swinging in. And so keeping 2 back, I just don't know about it. I don't really care for this creature. It is a 2/1 for first strike for 2, which is fine. There's the upside there if you find yourself in the situation that you can take advantage of, tapping them to ping your opponent. So, I think it is a strict upside over what it could be. So I'm going to go C+ on it. But I'm just not a huge fan of it. I'll take it super, super, super late. And I hope that I can have some better cards, but I'll probably play it more often than I won't. I hope I'm wrong about cohort, but tapping 2 full creatures just feels bad to me for some of the effects. As I said, some of the effects, I will totally tap 2 creatures for them. But some of them, especially at common, I just don't see the value of it. So that's going to wrap it up for red. Red looks not great. There's some fantastic cards, especially at rare and mythic, but the commons and uncommons are bad. Most of the creatures are just pure filler level. So many 3/2s for 3 with an ability that is either useless or negligible. So I think red really might get kind of pushed out to kind of a support color. I think it's going to be totally fine as a support color. It's not going to be like green in battle where you're just never going to touch it ever. But I think it is going to play a support role. I don't know if a solid red deck is going to do super well. But definitely let me know what you think about red. Do you agree with my kind of overall opinion on red being a side or a support color more than anything else? Let me know what you think I was wrong about, what you think of some of these cards, what your favorite card is, what card you're most looking forward to in the comment section down below. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at @TheManaLeak. That's LEEK, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/TheManaLeak. You've already found me here on YouTube. Please make use of that comment section down below, and please keep it civil. You guys have been fantastic so far, interacting with me and interacting with each other down there. Keep it up. I love seeing it. As well, if you like my videos, please click the like button and the subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on all the latest videos as they come out. We have some more set reviews coming. We have to do green, we have to do colorless, we have to do artifacts, we have to do multicolors, we have to do lands. Those miscellaneous ones will probably cover 2 videos on Wednesday and Thursday. And of course, you want to see the regularly scheduled program. You want to see my pre-release recap, my over-the-shoulder draft from the very first F&M when it comes out, box openings, Crack-A-Pack Tuesdays, Wacky Wednesdays, Spiky Saturdays, Top 10 Thursdays, and everything else that happens on this channel. So make sure that you do like and subscribe. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all next time.